Welcome to Music Crush, a new music podcast hosted by Flute New Music Consortium. I'm Elizabeth Robinson.
And I'm Nicole Riner. I feel like we're talking in a way. I mean, Elizabeth, you were saying earlier that you might be interested in discussing this, but I feel like we're sort of moving towards finding creative solutions to problems, or like making things happen and devising projects. Was that?
Mm-hmm. That is something I'm always interested in, especially I think with this crew. I think things I admire about both of you are that perhaps situations have not always been ideal, or the professional musical career path has not always been the linear one that one fantasizes about as a teenage up and coming musician. And so I'm always on the hunt for ways to make things happen that aren't necessarily the way things are done. And I feel like both of you do those things well. What's your best make it work strategy for getting a project off the ground?
I come from a reactionary place. I think and that's the way I write as well. Like I'll write something and then react to it, whether it's good or bad. And I think that's also how I function. I like to have a plan and end result in a goal, but I'm not afraid to find a different route. I mean, because 18-year-old Nicole said she was going to be a Disney animator and write her own soundtracks.
As one does.
That course is veered for many reasons, and it's not like that was just the only route I could see.
Sure.
And so, I think being open to other things, like you don't have to be hard-headed and stick with this route. You thought at 18 you wanted to do this, but then you change, right? And I think that happens with projects organically. You think you want this one thing, and then as you start working you find out, oh, actually this other idea might be better. And I think being open and reactionary to what you're working on is helpful, and not just driving to that endpoint regardless of consequences.
Growth mindset.
Yeah, I guess so. Whatever that's called.
I feel a little surprised that you're lumping me into this, Elizabeth. So that's very nice of you, but I'm trying to think of why you think this of me. But I guess
let's time out. You have a pretty impressive discography for someone who's been in academia for as long as you have, but who's had maybe not always the tenure track R1 research supported. I think you've built a career that looks a lot like an R1 flute professor without necessarily the infrastructure and support of that. And I think that's cool. Like, these were the things you wanted about your career, and life said these are the parts of that you get, and you were like, whatever, I'm still gonna have 18 million recordings and some pretty successful chamber ensembles. So you reality.
Well,
and that's where I'm coming from.
Good numbers, but those things, I mean, at some point, my very first album, I thought, oh, this was back when I was still thinking of applying for, tenure track jobs, which at some point I just abandoned. But I thought, oh, everybody has an album, and so I need to do one too. And so I guess that one was a little bit more planned. I mean, that was the most planned, really. And then I'm a very, very cheap person. And so, I started asking around. One thing that I have always appreciated about our community, if you ask the right people, and you pick up on the people who aren't going to help you, and all the other people who are incredibly generous. But there are so many people in classical music who are so generous with their time and their ideas. And if you just say, like, you did this thing, how did you do it? I got a lot of advice from people early on just by randomly emailing or calling people I barely knew and saying, like, I really admire this. What did you do? And so in that way, I started learning about different ways to fund a recording project. I mean, that was how I found out, oh, if you're not Yo-Yo Ma or Paula Robeson or something, you are going to pay for your own recording.
Yes.
Wholesale.
And that's an eye-opening day, isn't it?
It really is. Yeah. Well, I mean, it was like, wow, that sucks. But then it was also wonderfully democratizing, because I was like, wow, so all these people that I've been putting up on a pedestal, that's what they did too, Yeah. So then when I found that out, because no professor of mine ever told me, even though they all had recordings. They never told me how it happened. And then I was like, oh, well, that sucks because that sounds expensive. And then I was like, fuck it, I got to go find some money, And so, and then I think the rest of it was luck. That's such a frustrating answer to a question, but I was not living in Wyoming because I never have, but I was teaching in Wyoming, and the Wyoming Arts Council is surprisingly well funded, and it exists in the least populated state in the country.
Sure.
So, it's a big old pie, and very few slices get cut out of that pie in any given year. And so I just started poking around on their website and calling people and finding out how I could get funding. So that first recording was definitely an act of like, okay, I see that other people have this in their bios, and this is probably a step that I need to take.
Sure.
And then I think every other recording I've been on has not been my project that I've overseen. It's just been people inviting me. People, a situation occurs, and sometimes I can remember one in particular where I thought, oh, I don't think I have the brain power to do this right now, or the bandwidth. I don't think I have the bandwidth to learn this difficult music right now. But then I thought, I get to be on another recording, and I get a chance to work with the composer and learn this cool music. So it's not the ideal time, but I guess I should do it because someone isn't going to ask me later. And so I think the other projects that might, it's funny that you brought up recordings, because I don't even think about them. But they were all fun projects at the time. I think it was just a matter of saying yes when an opportunity arose, even though in my super type A brain, my first reaction was, I don't know if I have the energy to do this perfectly. But then I thought, well, this is when I'm getting asked. So would I want to do this ever? Because now is the time when I'm being invited to do this. And I think I've done that a lot. And I think I feel like I've had a much less strict trajectory in my head of how things should happen. Like I just kept majoring in music. Didn't start out as a music major, but I found that I was spending all my time in the practice room. Like that was my reward for doing my Russian homework.
So what was your major? I don't think
Russian.
I knew it was Russian.
Just Russian. I took 2 years of it in high school, and I thought it was fun. I realize now what I liked about it was maybe being able to communicate with people. I never really got that good at it, but also the cultural, education that comes along with learning a language is really cool. But then I was a Russian major in college, and I was just sitting there like memorizing these stupid flashcards of words, just like so tedious, just like my whole existence. My first semester of freshman year felt like more flashcards of vocabulary words to memorize. And then, oh God, is it time yet? Can I go take a break and go practice? Because I was taking flute lessons on the side just for fun. And my flute teacher was like, you should just try taking a theory class and just see if you like it. And then I did. And I came into a lesson and I was like, I love theory. And she was like, that's not what people say. Maybe
it's not.
But I kept being bad at something on flute. I would conquer something, and then there'd be a new thing that I sucked at, but it was something that sounded really cool in recordings, and I wanted to figure it out. And I think that's how I ended up deciding to do flute. But then I just kept so I did my master's, and I didn't have a job, and I was like, well, shit, maybe I should do a doctorate because I don't want to get a day job. Like I was just trying to avoid being an adult and getting a job is honestly what it was. But then I went and did my doctorate, and a lot of the people around me, which is reasonable because the doctorate's not super fun. Most of the people around me were either just like in a holding pattern, taking orchestra auditions, hoping they would get something before they had to finish the degree. At Indiana, there was plenty of that. But the other people who were actually serious about it were like, I'm going to be a professor and I'm going to do this and this and that, and that's what a doctorate's for. So that's smart. I was just like, I don't know, I just want to learn more about flute and just like try to make a living being a flute player. Yeah, but I think I was much more just like, if I can get paid to be a flutist in some way, and I liked teaching and I liked playing, I was open to all of it. And maybe that's all it has been for me, is just oh, this opportunity came up, or I found out about something. It's like sometimes the biggest projects I have had in mind, that were a big deal to me, or sort of a pivot, have all had to do with surviving academia, to be perfectly honest. A lot of it is about recruiting. There have been a lot of times when I've really switched up things that I've done and created new projects at my school just because I was desperate to recruit. And I'm in a point like that right now too, and I'm trying some new things. And so when you originally said that, Elizabeth, I thought, does she know how much I do at UW? Because that was the only thing that I could think of, was like, yeah, when I really need a project to happen, it's out of desperate need. And so I like can't sleep for days, and I'm like, my whole studio is going to graduate, or I can't hang on to freshmen. What the hell do I do now? And then out of that desperation and panic comes some creative ideas that last for a while, but never forever. But the playing stuff, I think, has just been like, cool, I'm up for it. I'll try it. I didn't know that was a thing, but yeah, I'll give it a try. Yeah, I think it's just that, like, okay, I know that I don't know everything. So what else can I learn? I mean, I think that's the root of it.
But we've got a composer here, and I'm always looking for ways to work with composers and get new pieces from them. Sometimes that composer is you, but like, how do you pay them? Where does the money come from? Have you ever had a project that you just like really wanted to do, and you and the commissioner have had to figure out like how you were going to fund it? So
all the time,
able to feed Gertie
all the time. I mean, I know the biggest complaint people have with me and my rates are a little too low, but usually they're low because I know I can sell it, later. So the trade-off, if it's something where I'm like, this will never get performed again because it's so unique to the situation, that's one thing. If it's something where I'm like, oh, other people will play this, or if I just don't have time or just don't want to do it, then the price goes up. I mean,
Okay, so that's like a rate adjustment, but like there's a project you're really excited about.
I'll take a dirt cut. Like if I'm really excited about it, I will lowball. Most of the time it's people just trying to fill out. I mean, I've had people like, I think Brett Pimental is a good example of someone that approached me and said, what are your rates for writing a piece like this? And I told him, and he said, okay, I'm going to write a grant, and if I get it, we'll do it. Or he's going to do a grant application. If I get it, we'll do it. And he didn't get it. And he said, I'm sorry, we'll have to push it. And I'm like, that's fine. And I just waited 8 years later. He's like, hey, is your price still the same? I'm sure it's different. I'm like, no, I told you that quote. That's what we'll do. And because he got some money from a grant for a different grant. It's the same thing. So, I mean, and there's other players that this is the same thing. And sometimes it's just a waiting game until they can find the right funding for it. But for me, that's been the only creative financial stuff that has happened. Sometimes it will be, it's really how excited I am about it. I mean, I just, I've written a lot of flute choir pieces. I don't think that's something I'm going to contribute a whole bunch of different ideas at this point anymore. But if you're asking me to write, I don't know, some crazy brass quintet thing or some like other stuff that I don't have a lot of my catalog. Like if my catalog is like got one thing for your instrument, I'm always looking to diversify my portfolio. I mean, and so I'll work with people like give me a great recording, especially if you're going to have an album, like a professional recording that's very attractive. If you're going to help me promote it at an instrument fair where like the flute convention, like if you're playing it for other flutists, it's helpful, especially if I can get the publication to a vendor at the exhibit hall. Those are all things that we can kind of work with on. And I think a lot of composers, not all of them, mind you, a lot of them, that's the sticking point. That's the price. That's what it is, because they just don't want to deal with those shenanigans. And I get like it's a lot. It's a lot to manage. A lot of people hate that side, especially composers that don't have, if they're just excited about your project, a lot of them are willing to help you seek funding or find different avenues or put together consortiums,
Yeah, but it's tricky. Like you and I go way back. So yeah. I feel like there's a certain level of trust there where I can say like, yes, I just don't have this kind of money. What are your thoughts?
That is, I mean, I think you've hit it on the head. Is trust is a huge issue, especially for me. Like people want to work with me and do things. I'm like, I have never heard of you. I don't know who you are. And I will If you don't think I am stalking you on social media and asking your friends if I know your friends, we have mutual friends, and I'm asking them about you, you're crazy. Even the people that I know have the money. So yeah, trust is huge.
But then,
And
like,
so,
developing that with a new composer, because as much as I love you and I love your
Oh
music,
yeah.
it's nice to have
You
variety.
can't play my
But
stuff all the time, as I've been told by many people.
you wanna bring someone new into the fold, and it's like, you don't know me from Adam, and
Yeah.
maybe we have like an acquaintance. I guess my stumbling block is always like, I want to pay you what you're worth, but there are
Yeah.
only so many dollars in my
Right.
bank account, and my dogs also eat.
Right.
Like, how do we build these relationships? How do we build these friendships? How do we start these collaborations if at first it's just like, I am aware of all of your pieces because I've been stalking you on your website and social media for like 6 years, working up the courage to have this conversation, but you just became aware that I exist like now.
Yeah. I mean, you're gonna have to strap in for the long haul. I mean, developing that relationship. I mean, it took like, I think I say 8 years, but I don't know if Brett and I had 8 years of finally getting Jeepers to fruition, but it felt that way. And I mean, I mean, and initially he went to UGA and he actually had my composition professor as a bassoon professor, and I did not know that, but that's how he got his foot in the door. Even though he was a stranger to me, he knew that he had found out a real deep connection that opened the door to trust. And then also I had the woman that works on my flute, Judith Klein. She actually went to school with him, so I was able to be like, is he crazy? And she's like, no, he's delightful and he's really good at all his instruments, and it's really upsetting. Like, you should work with him. Like, so, and that's a big endorsement. But like you said, it just takes time for a lot of composers, like just being like the things you're doing all the right things, like being very specific about their work, and then just trying to develop that friendship. For you and me, it was like you sat with me at lunch at the flute fair. I mean,
And then I bought like 4 of your pieces with no hope of
right.
performing them. I just bought your music. Yeah. That was step one. I'm just gonna buy some flute quartets.
Yeah, I mean, you did it right. I mean, I mean, you should just do that every time. And then, composers, they're all different. As much as I like to say they're all the same, they really aren't. You just gotta make friends.
Did you and Brett stay in touch with each other through those 8 years or however many it was before he was able to get funded? Like, did you?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes he would just kind of update me on what was happening, and sometimes it was just casual things like Facebook stuff. I mean, he didn't, and I'm going through this with someone else now, and I won't bring that person up because we're still trying to figure out funding, but that person has been the same. It's like, it's crazy how it's followed the same route. Yeah, it's a real person that people find delightful, and funding is the issue, and we're trying to make it work, but it might be a little bit longer than we both planned, but it's kind of nice because we're getting to know each other a bit more, and maybe a better piece will come out of it because I know that person and I can write to that person's strengths more. I think there's benefits for it not immediately happening. Sometimes when it's a stranger and they want you to write immediately, and you're like, you're scrambling to find out more about them so that you can write a piece that's custom. And their personality, you don't want to write a piece that they just don't have any bond with. It's not great.
Do you personalize do you think that's more common than not? To deeply personalize the piece for?
I don't know if it is. I think maybe most people, when they personalize, they think about playing ability.
Sure.
But I like to put a little bit of that person's personality into the piece. It gives me inspiration. I wish I talked to fellow composers more. I don't think I talk about this enough with them. It may be abnormal.
I would like to assign you the homework of do some research and report back. I'm fascinated.
Yeah, I might have to talk to Charisse, Valerie, and Amanda about it. I mean, those are my go-to composer friends.
All composers that I like. So let's hear how the sausage gets made in those particular factories.
I think it might be. I think knowing the can I count the 3 of them, that might be unique to me, but that's my process. And I find it fun to put in inside jokes just between me and the performer, even if the performer isn't aware of it all the time.
It would be fun to have such a personalized piece. And,
but that's the point of commissioning, I thought. Sometimes I think it's a part of like, there's a need, and that's why there's a commission. There's like a gap in somebody's portfolio, and you want them to write a piece for your instrument or an ensemble you feel is missing, or that you just don't have the material for your ensemble to fill out a program and you want something specific for that theme. But I mean, it's like tailoring a suit, making a suit for someone. You want a bespoke piece, I guess, that really highlights your abilities. I'm not going to write beatboxing for people that hate it and can't do it. I'm not going to do that to that person. But if they're honest with me about their playing abilities and what they like, I will do that to the extreme. I'm like a dog with a bone. I mean, and that was the joke between Mary and Matt. So Mary Matthews and Matt Angelo, like we were good friends because I've written for them many times, but when we've written to each other, they know how I am. And I remember we were having a conversation and Matt wanted a piece that had piccolo in it. He liked his piccolo. He didn't play piccolo enough. Wanted to play piccolo more. And I was like, great. He said, and I love playing up in the higher register. And Mary looked at him and said, be careful now. Because you know how she is. He's like, it's fine.
Was it?
Yeah,
fine?
He had regrets. No, it was not fine. It was not fine. But he did it. I mean, he still did it because he can do it. He was just we like to be exhausted by each other. And complain to each other about the other person. So I mean, he could do it and it was fine, but he was not, I don't think that's what he had in mind. I'm just going to do it over and over again because I know it's possible and he can do it. So that's the difference. If he had said that, I probably would have been a little more. Well, no, we know from experience I'm not, because I've brought that. Elizabeth knows I've brought that up before, and someone had said, "Oh yeah, I'm comfortable up there," and then find out they were not at all. So, I mean, just the honesty part is what I think any composer needs when you're working with them.
I definitely, I mean, like from the performer's perspective, I think it's ego, and insecurity. Yeah. I mean, the very first flute piece I commissioned, number one, I didn't want to give too many parameters and feel like I was straitjacketing them or being bossy. And, as you're talking, maybe that was totally the wrong attitude to have about parameters. But then I remember he wrote me something that I could do, but I hated doing. Just physically, I hated doing it. And I was like, well, I don't want to admit that I'm bad at this or can't do this because I can do it. But so there's this, maybe 45-second chunk in the piece that I just hate playing. And I should have just said, I can do that, but I'm not good at it and I don't like it. It's flutter tongue, because I can't roll my R's. And so I have to do it on my throat. And so I just tear the shit out of my throat every time I do that. And I was like, oh, flutter tongue, and I was like, well, I don't want to admit, like, it's already kind of lame that I can't roll my R's. And this is something that a person like me has to deal with. But it was my piece. And I should have, afterwards I was like, I should have just said no flutter tongue, please. But he'd already written it. And I was like, oh, I'm going to totally ruin the creative experience for him.
No, you didn't go back and like, I mean, it would have been a tough pill to swallow. But I mean, I've given pieces to people and they're just like, it's too much of that one thing that I'm not comfortable with. And we've made alterations. I mean, it's just like, I've made the pant legs way too long. They can't walk in these.
Yeah.
So I have to take them up, and that's fine. That was something a measurement I should have double checked.
Yeah, and I think from our perspective, don't walk in with stiletto heels and say go all the way. I don't know. I can't maintain that metaphor. That was a good one, but I could have said it from the beginning.
I can run this 5K in stilettos. It's fine. It's fine. Yeah. There's no problem. I mean, no, it's not fine. You shouldn't be uncomfortable.
I have a bunion.
Right. I have bad arches. I can't do it.
But I know other people have done that too, and walk away with pieces that they're not totally happy with, and they know it's their fault, so I think it's good to hear from a composer, like just Just,
I mean,
don't apologize for it.
there's things you don't think about. I mean, I think that's what's like having a lot of conversations up front in the beginning. And I think it annoys a lot of people that I don't know if it annoys them. I don't know if they think it's necessary. Like I like to email numbers and contract so that I have something to go back and say, here, this is what we agreed upon when I write the contract. But as far as like the creative process of the piece, I like to have a conversation because you have to be a little bit of a you have to you have to bring that out of people because the performers don't think about that. Like I'll just practice and I'll make it work until you start like investigating, push and push and push, and then they'll say, oh well, you know, it's not my favorite. And when they get more comfortable, because performers, it's a trust issue too. Like you have to make them feel comfortable that if they tell you a weakness, you're not going to blab that all over the countryside.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and it usually takes me 30 minutes to an hour before a performer will tell me that they are not comfortable doing something. And most of the time, the first 20 minutes, we're just joking around about, you know, just all the things. And then we'll just talk about the things they love to do and what they don't and what their wheelhouse is. And then I'll have to start prodding a little deeper because I know what I'm going to want to write. Like I'm going to want to write extended techniques and I need to start prodding. Like, are you comfortable doing this? Do you want to do that? Do you hate this? Do you love it? Sometimes framing it as, do you love doing this? Or do you hate doing this is better than, can you do this? Or can you not do this? When you say can't and can, no performer will admit to can't. Right. But if you love it and they're like, I'm not a fan of that. And you're like, okay, no need to write it in. Do you like, is it okay if I do it like a couple times? And they're like, maybe once. But sometimes, but most of the times, I'll get a feel for it. Now, I will have to do some edits. Like some performers are trying just for the first time to do more extended techniques. And so we're trying to pinpoint what's the ability they can do. But, you know, some composers are trying to push the envelope and they just want to see how much they can get away with. And if a performer isn't going to push back, then they'll just see until you crack. And if you're not going to crack, then they're just going to keep pushing, which I've been guilty of too. Especially if it's friends, you know, if I have friends and I've heard enough of them play enough, I'm like, they can do it. They just need to practice a little harder. But I have faith they can do it. They just need to practice, which I thought Elizabeth was doing with those microtones. And then I found out I was just writing that microtone just for my broken leaky flute piccolo and not everybody else's piccolo couldn't do it because it wasn't leaking like mine was.
Memories.
So have y'all had any, I mean, because you both have interacted with composers, and so sometimes I feel like I'm the weird one. Like, are other composers more? Is it just been like you just say, I want a commission piece, and they just write? You hear nothing until you get a piece?
Sometimes.
Really?
Yeah.
Fascinating.
It's different. It's amazing to me how different it is with each individual composer. I think you were probably the first formal commission that I did, so I think a lot of the times my expectation gets shaped by how it worked the first time. But you know, I've had composers that don't want contracts; they just want a written handshake, and
that's so dangerous.
I mean, I am, I think, of the same mindset you are, that I would feel better if things were in writing, but if that's their process, it hasn't bitten me in the rear end yet. And if they're comfortable with it, I guess who am I to question?
That's a lot of trust.
I wonder why someone would actively say no contract.
Because it's happened to me twice as an individual commissioner. One of them, it just seemed like part of their attitude or life philosophy, or like it was very important to them that people be trustworthy and good, and it seemed more important to them as a personal thing. And you know, I knew myself and knew I wasn't going to intentionally take advantage of them. And actually in that commission, several things ended up changing along the way, so I hope that they were comfortable with the end result without the contract. I had another commission where we talked about having one, and I think they just needed flexibility because there were a number of things going on in their life, and it was in the last 2 years of my life where there were a number of things going on in my life. So I think on both ends, we just needed so much flexibility. But in both situations, part of a smaller community where there was some overlap, and if one of us had done something awful to the other one, it would have been really unfortunate, but also I think it would have followed us. So less danger than maybe in other situations. I don't know, but I've had composers that haven't wanted contracts. I had a composer where I really wanted a contract because I didn't know them very well, and they didn't really. It ended up working out fine. It was just alarming. If I recall correctly from my first contract with Nicole Chamberlain, there was like a list of extended techniques that I was comfortable with, or I was supposed to make a list of things I would prefer not to see. And I think I've had a similar conversation with one, maybe two of the composers I've worked with since, but it's really fascinating to me how much input some folks have wanted and how truly little others have asked for, and they just sort of slap a score down on your desk, and everybody's like, well, I hope that I like this, and or I hope that it's playable for me as a performer. Maybe they're doing what you do and checking my online media, of which historically there hasn't been very much. So I don't know.
Then there's different people, like at that first Flute Music Consortium panel that we had, and it was Asha. Okay. But she had said that she writes drafts and sends drafts to the performers for feedback. And I was just like, like that to me is so vulnerable. Like that is because the way I write, it is very ugly until the bitter end. And then it starts to clean up from there. And like my thoughts are just chaos until the end, until I start to figure it out. And sending drafts to me seems so scary. But she was comfortable with that. So she didn't feel like she was getting away from the performer too much before the piece was completed. I mean, that was incredibly generous and vulnerable of her to do.
But you do your communication at the outset, and my impression was she maybe did less interviewing before the writing had started. So maybe that was her touchstone.
I guess so.
Just a different point in the process.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense her process to do it that way. I mean, when I was doing web design, like we'd send up mock-up number 1, and then the client would give us feedback, and then we would edit that mock-up and give it back to them, get a little bit more, and that was final round. So there was a little bit more like help with the customization and hit the target correctly. And I just never felt like doing that for composition because it just never shaped up that way like it did for me for or maybe I just didn't want to give the commissioner that much control. I don't know.
It just has to do with the process.
Yeah.
The way she writes. Yeah, that is something that is more familiar to me, is not getting a lot of communication early on, but then seeing a draft.
Yeah.
But it probably just it depends on how you write and what your drafts look like before you're ready to be done. I have also experienced, I mean, I've had composers I've commissioned who send a draft, and then if anything needs to be tweaked, it turns out great. But I once had a composer, and I don't think this person was trying to be difficult at all, but sent me a draft, and that person was already pretty sold on the piece when they sent me the draft. And then there was some stuff that was not, it was like playable-ish, but physically I wasn't going to be able to nail it every time. I mean, just literally physically moving from one kind of sound to another was like,
it's precarious
here. This isn't a great octave for the kind of playing you want, something super, super high with C sharps and Ds and D sharps that was supposed to be lyrical, I know. I also just like failed to ask another flutist before showing me the draft. But then when I got that draft, I think the composer had sat on it long enough that it was, they did what they could, but it was difficult to conceive of changing things because it was so stuck in their heads that way.
It takes me, when I get revisions, and I've gotten some revisions, man, I have to take like a week to get some emotional detachment from the piece so I can see it from their point of view.
Yeah, I can imagine. Or just just being able to imagine another way that it could go when you devised that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hit. I mean, you just like, well, I got to give my brain some time to like not want to hear that because you just have lived with it for so long and that's all you hear, and like anything else sounds kind of wrong. And so I have to like, I mean, I've had some catastrophic ones before. I've had someone send it back and say it's not hard enough, and I was like, what do you? I was like, oh.
Hard.
And it was like I remember I was driving home to Savannah for like Christmas or I think it was Thanksgiving for like a week, and I remember getting the email, and I pulled over when I was like stopped. I was stopped, so I pulled up my email on like a potty break or something, a pit stop, and I opened it, and I was like, oh, and so I had to drive like 3 hours left of the drive, like just thinking like, what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? Like how to make this harder. I thought this was like based on previous pieces, they wanted it like this other piece, and it's not. This is the same level. And then drove back and then made it hard, and then I think it went the other way, like was too hard, and I think they only played it once, never sent me a recording, and never mentioned it ever again. And then I had played it later, and I was like, I think they may be onto something. But I mean, I just thought their playing was far superior than mine, and so I think I may have overshot.
Oh, I might just ask you one more question, Nicole.
Okay.
Is there anything else that, I mean, talking about this collaborative relationship that you have with each of your musicians, Nicole, is there anything else that you would love to just get out there in the world that we didn't ask about?
Like something that I want to say, like,
tell us how to be better collaborators with you.
Oh, yeah. I think the communication part is, and the honesty is the biggest deal. That's most of my quibbles with people. That's what it's come down to. Like, I've had people not invite me to premieres and didn't know that was the thing I would like to be at, even if I live far away. I mean, I can't always come to everything, especially if I have to lowball a commission. Like, maybe it won't help. Like, I can't get there. It doesn't make sense. It is my favorite part of the composition process is hearing the performance. That is my favorite part. The rehearsal is always a little scary for me, but I would like to be there, and I know a lot of performers are uncomfortable with hearing with the composer hearing the rehearsal. That is a very vulnerable part of the process. But like maybe the next to last rehearsal, so you have a chance to be without the composer and digest what the composer's feedback was. Certainly not at the first rehearsal, because no one wants that. Composer doesn't want to hear it. Performers don't want you there for that. I get it. But like, and not at the dress rehearsal. It's too late. But somewhere where you're comfortable sharing even some of the warts that might come out, because the warts might be able to be fixed. Like the composer might be able to find a workaround for that to make it easier. So a rehearsal, even if the composer can't physically be there, maybe send them a little recording that they are not allowed to share with anybody else. Make that clear. And send me the programs, because I do have to submit those to get performance royalties that you don't typically have to pay unless you're freelancing at a venue that doesn't pay them. Let me know about performance dates. People will send me stuff all the time. Did you know it? Or I'll get an alert, because I do search for myself on YouTube, and I do search for myself on the internet to see if somebody's performed something, because I found some beautiful performances that no one let me know about. And then I've heard some really awful ones that a conversation about an interpretation conversation would have corrected some of that. Yeah, I mean, it just boils down to like just reaching out. I know a lot of composers aren't very accessible. They're very busy, and I am not that person, I don't think, yet. I mean, I might be a little slow, especially with recent events. I know I am really slow because I have a lot of emails to catch up on. But yeah, I like to know stuff. And I'm here to help you have a successful performance, and I want that very much. The other thing is people like to rearrange my music for their instrument without my input, and that is highly illegal. So please don't do that.
You're doing an arrangement of a piece of yours for another instrument?
Yep.
Oh wow, that's bold.
Yeah, I've had people change a cello part to a marimba, and the cello had like Bartok pits and all these like special bowings, and I'm like, what? That piece must have sounded so redundant. I mean, I don't and tell you to your face that they did it really proudly, and I'm like, nope, you can't, nope. nope. If I had more money, I might sue. I mean, those are things that can't happen without a composer's blessing or permission, or for hire them to do it themselves, which I like to have a lot of control over my stuff. And instrumentation is a starting point for me for writing. And if you change the instrumentation, for me, that changes the whole piece. Not for everybody. I mean, I've heard composers just say, yeah, you can play it on viola. Yeah, that'll work. It's fine. And I'm like, I don't know. But I think a lot of that's extended techniques, and that's the reason why I can't change it as much. But yeah, those are kind of sticking points for me. You know, as long as you try. I mean, and people are going to fail at performances just because they're not, the piece is too hard for them and they're really, really trying. As long as the effort is there, I mean, a bad performance is fine. But if you're playing the key signature as correctly as you can, and you're, you know, maybe it's a little under tempo. I mean, I'd rather it be under tempo and correct than over tempo and a hot mess. Which seems to be the case more than not. But you I don't have to tell y'all battle that with students all the time, I'm sure, about rushing. But yeah, students are going to be students, and they're just going to mess up. I mean, that's how it is. It's part of learning. But yeah, I just want to know things. I just want to be a part of the thing. So like communication. Let me know stuff. I'll put it on the website. You playing? I don't care if you're a freshman at who knows where university. I'll you know, put it on the website. I think that's like the best part, that your stuff's out there and people enjoy it enough to invest their time to like program it. Like they could put anything on their program, and they chose to put your piece on the program. Especially students, you only get like one recital a year, maybe. You know, and they chose to put your piece on it. Oh my God, that's huge. Or I mean, maybe they didn't choose, maybe the professor chose. So, but whatever. Well, yeah, that's it. I mean, I even made a video about it. Flute specialist wanted me to write an article, and I was like, well, I'm actually working on a video called like salty composers and how to avoid them.
Oh yeah, I remember seeing that.
And okay, so because I know you want to talk about that. Now you're like, one last question, and now here we are. Because I know you wanted to cover this topic a little bit, Nicole Riner. I get emails every once in a while about somebody wanting to commission me because I am a lady. And that is the sole purpose. I've had it happen. And I'm sure I'm not the only group of people that has that happen to. You know, I'm sure I've heard it from other composers of different backgrounds say something similar. The only reason they were targeted was because of who they were, and not because of what they wrote. And like, I think all anybody wants as an artist is that they get work because their work is deemed worthy. Not because I have a uterus, which, surprise, I don't anymore. There is that. I mean, I think, and unfortunately, it is still necessary to have these festivals and concerts made up of a group of people, but as long as that is also infiltrated throughout the season as well, and it's not only isolated to that one program on a season. Because I still hear things at concerts, because the thing about being an unknown composer is you hear things in the audience all the time. And so I have this perfect, and it's also the other part of why I like to go to performances, because you'll hear people talk about your piece and not know you're the composer. And then you stand up.
Oh God.
It is the best.
Oh God.
It is the best. Most of the time it's been people that have said lovely things. And then I'm too embarrassed to tell them I'm the composer. And I pretend that I don't hear them. But sometimes you'll hear things that are not, that aren't great. But then people start applauding, you get a knowledge, and then you stand up and you can just feel them like wilting, you know. But anyway, yeah, so if you are going to include someone, a composer, or really anyone based solely on their gender or their background or their ethnicity or their or any reason, just make sure you open with, you know, I've heard your music, I love it, you come highly recommended, I would like to commission you for this piece. By the way, one of the leading forces of me trying to commission you is I wanted developed this program for this reason. I mean, just be honest. Most composers will be game for it, but there's some that they're like, no, it's just because of my music and that's it, or nothing. And don't pigeonhole me to write about being a mother, please.
Yeah.
Because it's not a thing I do. Especially not anymore. There's no ovaries, there's no uterus. So please stop making my, whole being about making children, or mothering other children. So those kind of things kind of burn my backside a little bit, and things I'd like people to avoid in the future,
That's amazing.
Okay.
Yeah, it is helpful. And then the last bit, just absolutely amazing to me. You're getting that kind of communication.
Yeah, and it's shocking from the people that give it to you too, because I've had people that have come to me for that information. I didn't know them, but they came, like a friend had recommended that they contact me about writing it, and then I contact that friend and I'd be like, "Oh, this person wrote this email," and that person is like, "I'm sorry, what did they say?" Like the disbelief.
Well, that's good.
And then there's like, they're trying really hard. Please don't take it personal. Let's see if we can kind of work through this one section, because it was like, especially one commission I almost didn't do for that sole reason. Like, I almost dropped it. And I said, I told my friend, I said, if this person introduces me as as the female composer, a woman composer, I'm going to say, thank you, male conductor. I'm just going to do it. I mean, and just let it be how ridiculous that sounds. But my response was, thank you. I'm so glad you enjoy my work enough to include me. So that was my passive aggressive way of saying, next time, lead with that. I don't know if that registered. I get the feeling that wasn't something that would come across, but I said it anyway.
One can only hope.
No, and it turned out to be a lovely collaboration. Like,
oh, good.
He turned out to be a lovely person, just took some missteps, and hopefully next time that won't be an issue. Trying to educate, but it's gross sometimes.
I think it's wonderfully generous of you, though. I really appreciate it. I appreciate being able, I mean, like, I know you socially also, but I think it's clear after 5 minutes that you are, a straight shooter and someone that I can ask honest questions of, and you will give me honest, respectful answers that will really benefit me. And I really appreciate that.
Oh, that's like the best compliment. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Music Crush. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also support the podcast, read show notes, and learn more about FNMC by visiting www.flutenewmusicconsortium.com.